All right, get comfortable. Yeah, I think it's funny. Just a couple of years ago at a Disrupt event in New York, there was a panel on the sustainability of the gig economy. Was it a good thing? What are the negative externalities coming out of it? And here we are in 2019, and now that's in more focus than ever. And now we're faced with this question of how founders, companies, or pretty much anyone can help, be a positive force in the gig economy and help right the ship, basically. So luckily, we have two great panelists to help talk us through that. With Amanda de Cadenet of Girl Gaze and with Derecka Mehrens of Working Partnership USA and Silicon Valley Rising. I'd probably do a disservice with the introduction, so I thought we would let you guys introduce yourselves, your organizations, what you're focused on, and then we can dive in from there.
Want to go first?
Either way. All right. So my name is Derecka. I work with Working Partnerships USA, which is a community labor alliance that was formed in the mid-90s with unions, the faith community, and progressive organizations looking to do a couple things. One, to push back on the narrative at that time in the mid-90s that the tech economy was working for everyone, because even then it wasn't. And two, to really inspire the tech sector to be a part of a force for good in creating the solutions for the biggest problems of our time. Fast forward 25 years, we work on a lot of different issues. We're coalition-based. We believe our hidden mission, not so hidden up here on stage, is to build power on behalf of working people. And through that, we have launched in the last few years a successful campaign called Silicon Valley Rising, which is organizing the invisible workers in the tech sector, janitors, food service workers, shuttle bus drivers, now gig workers, who are largely left out of the prosperity that the tech sector is creating, but are really having some success.
Yeah, awesome. Amanda?
That's a lot. Well done. I'm Amanda de Cadenet, and I am the founder and CEO of Girl Gaze. And Girl Gaze launched about 4 years ago, and we are extremely laser-focused on closing the gender pay gap and ensuring that a big piece of the population, 53% of the population that identifies as female, is included in the workforce, specifically the creative workforce. And our technology connects our global community. We have about 300,000 individuals in 62 countries around the world, and we connect them directly with brands and companies who want to do better and hire from our diverse community. And our technology allows people who, due to lack of education or socioeconomic background, whatever the circumstances are, they might not live in a city where they could get that opportunity or might not know anyone to be able to get in front of the right people. We connect people directly with the people that can hire them.
Great. So, I thought that it would be great to, Derecka, especially given your, years working on worker rights, but also here in the Valley and in the tech sector, to sort of help us set the stage and talk about sort of what was that original promise of the gig economy, what was the value proposition, and where do we go wrong?
That's a big question. First, the gig economy it exists in a larger context. And I would say, from our perspective, that larger context is one in which neoliberalism is failing, trickle-down economics is proven wrong, and that everyday working people, frankly, aren't surviving and are looking for something more. And so you have a situation in which the systemic system we put together to create employment, to create our communities, to build our housing, to give us jobs, is dysfunctional. And within that, folks are going to come up with disruptive solutions to pieces of it with a promise in mind to solve a problem, but without a systemic, without a larger solution that will end up, in our view, exacerbating existing inequalities. And so while I have met with these companies, and I have the human beings inside them are amazing and really do believe they're changing the world, the reality is it's a contradiction.
Yeah.
To say that it's a contradiction. I guess I'll leave it at that.
And you mentioned sort of these the inequalities that are being exacerbated, and pretty much every day there's another criticism being thrown at these gig economy companies. In your view, what is sort of the most immediate sort of issue that needs to be tackled, whether it's worker benefits or something else?
Worker voice. Yeah. The problem is that the worker, every time you use the app and a worker picks you up, that worker is managed by an algorithm, has no relationship to their coworkers, has no relationship to the boss and to the center where profits are being earned, and has no leverage, right? Has no ability to bargain, to have a say about working conditions when they're harassed, when wage theft happens, when they get 60% of their wages go to the company and they don't understand why. Who do they go to? And so worker voice is the most important thing. Giving workers a way to aggregate their power and a seat at the table.
Yeah. And now it seems like not only your organization, but there's startups that aren't just trying to make the next gig economy or marketplace startup, but startups that are actually working to address some of the inequalities that were created by the gig economy or some of these gaps, such as yours with Girl Gaze.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no. I would love for you to sort of just talk about, what it's like, how you started that, and then sort of dive into maybe some of the issues that you face when you're trying to build a sustainable gig economy company that thinks about its workers.
Sure. So the system that was set up originally did not take into consideration women. Mm-hmm. And the workforce has been set up in a way to service, unfortunately, specifically one gender. And we come at this from the perspective of what we do at Girl Gaze is not just ensure that our community are paid equally and fairly and they have an opportunity to be hired, but we also make sure that there are protections within that job. So we don't just say, here's the job and get on with it. There's a lot of education that goes into place because we're teaching people how to be in the workplace too. And so we ensure that when they are at work, that they have regular breaks and that there's adequate food, and there's a lot of explanation that goes into, getting someone who hasn't been in the workforce into the workforce and helping them to stay there. And so one of the things we do is we work with companies and brands who want to hire from our global pool of creatives, and we let them know what some of the obstacles could be for them hiring them, because a lot of it is internal, like you said, it's systemic. And so what I found is that most people aren't just excluding people because they're sexist or misogynistic, they just hire who they know a lot of the time, or this is just their pool of people. And so when you make it easy for people to hire outside of their comfort zone and to say, hey, here's another whole demographic of individual that does really great work that you could have access to, and here's the best way to engage with them, people are extremely responsive. We work closely with Unilever. We did a project where our community created 6,000 pieces of content in 62 countries. And Unilever is a big company that has a lot of internal rules around procurement and all kinds of things. And unfortunately, they're an amazing company, but I'm not going to just single Unilever out because there's a lot of companies that historically have not paid what we consider to be fair wages. And so we as a company say, well, that's great. Yes, we would love to work with you too, but you must pay, here's the market rate, and we don't pay beneath that. And there have been organizations who have said, well, that's not how we do it. And I've said, well, that's why we exist, to challenge you as a big company to stop underpaying the creatives who are ultimately making all of this content for you. And I'm not afraid to do that. And so my team will get it so far, and then they'll say, oh, we need you to get on the phone. And then I have to get on the phone and say, hey, I understand that you don't support equal and fair pay. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. And most of the time there will be some, and I said, well, is that correct? Because here's the equal and fair wage that person should be paid for that job. And most of the time, people pay it. Because when you present them with, are you really supporting paying a woman less than you would be paying a man for this? Most people are not going to say, yes, I am. And so that's something that we do that is really important. And as we do it company by company, and we have worked with Google, with Unilever, with Gucci, with Bumble, we've worked with so many Fortune 500 companies. The first introduction into how we do it at Girl Gaze, people are a bit taken aback because it's not how they're used to doing it. But once they've gotten used to working with us, I would say we have repeat customers year over year. And what I would say is that it sets up a new benchmark for them, that now they can point to that and say, oh, well, we did that with Girl Gaze, and it seems to work really well, and it actually hasn't, affected our marketing budgets too much. So yeah, let's support equal and fair pay.
And that sort of, you hit on a few interesting points there. I'm wondering when, maybe this is optimistic, but we like to think of some of these big gig economy companies, maybe they were, starting off thinking of the worker, and then sort of as there were these negative externalities that might have come up as they were growing the network, trying to create these network effects, both on the demand side and the customer supplier side. So I'd be curious in terms of, how have you avoided these negative externalities when you're growing? And
Well, one of the biggest challenges for us has been that if you only hire one gender, you leave yourself open to be sued for discrimination. And which is really interesting because I was like, we're just trying to get this entire demographic hired, but then there's a law in place that says you cannot do that. And so there's interesting sort of archaic laws, I think some of them are archaic, that are in place that you have to kind of spend a lot of money on lawyers trying to work out what are the loopholes here so that we can do this, because otherwise you would just say, okay, well, I guess we can't do it because we might get sued. Okay, forget it. Sorry, everybody. You're just going to have to stay out the workforce. But obviously, I'm way more passionate about this than letting that stop me. So there's a lot of weird laws in place and protect the status quo so that you cannot come and disrupt it. And there's a big list of these things that I could go into, but part of what we have to do is to do a risk analysis on those things and say, okay, this is in place. What's it going to take for us to do this? And and generally, I'm not risk adverse at all. In fact, my team is more risk adverse than I am, and they have to sometimes stop me from saying, we're doing this anyway, because I think you have to be that committed to pushing past the barriers.
Yeah. And sort of, since you mentioned these institutions and things that are in place, I'd be curious to, stepping back and thinking about not just the founders, but people who are working at maybe some of these larger incumbents. Derecka, I'd be curious in terms of thinking about sort of the incumbent large gig economy players. How can people at those companies or even the companies themselves really adjust strategically or culturally to really make a difference here in the gig economy and be a positive force going forward?
That's a great question. I got a chance we had our annual partnership celebration in San Jose a couple weeks ago, and we had the opportunity to honor some of the Google Walkout organizers and connect those organizers with the janitors and the food service workers and the shuttle bus drivers on their campuses. One of the, I think, real theories of our work that's important is that, because our analysis is that the existing economy isolates and alienates people from one another and communities from one another, and you have white supremacy and you have historical segregation in occupations, right? Women's work is women's work, and it's paid less because occupational segregation exists. The same is true for workers of color. One of the most powerful things that workers can do who have more bargaining power and are considered the talent more so than whether it's a service worker or a gig worker is get to know them. Go to their events, show up for them when they protest, or show up for them when policy hearings on issues that affect them are taking place.
Leverage your position,
exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Why do you have, my feeling on if you are one of those people that has more power than someone else, leverage your power
exactly right.
for other people to uphold them.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And if we did that more often, writ large in the world, it would be a better place, I guarantee it. But yeah. Yeah,
and just thinking of the same company, you've had worked with some of the largest players in the Valley, Google's, Apple's, XYZ, and had some major wins even outside of the gig economy with renter protection rights and stuff. Is there a willingness that you've seen, or maybe an increased willingness in recent years that to sort of address these gig economy issues or just worker rights in the Valley in general?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I've been organizing in the Valley. I was a community organizer for 10 years, and now I do union organizing and union community organizing. 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, I think it was a very different scenario. I think coming out of the Great Recession, You look at the economic data, it was a comeback that was not a real comeback for most folks. Part-time jobs on the rise, more gig work. Folks feel so insecure. You know, the gig companies talk about flexibility. You know what the flip side of flexibility is? It's really stability. What people want is stable lives, so they can be with their kids on the weekend, and they can have fun, and they can like have health care. I mean, if we could achieve that, it's not really flexibility. The reason they need flexibility is because their other jobs have not, aren't paying, right? And it's not working for them. Yeah. So I think the companies know that, and you can see it because when we sit down with CEOs, you know, they will say, for my much better paid workforce, housing is a huge issue, and I'm like, yeah, for my folks too. We meet with janitors across the valley, and they'll be like, yeah, we want to organize, we want respect on the job, but you know what we also want is housing. What can you do about my housing? And we're like talking to them about worker issues, right? And so it was an imperative 4 years ago when we launched Silicon Valley Rising that we said we have to leverage the power of labor, the power of public policy, and the power of workers for housing issues. Because you can't, you know, you can win somebody a 7% raise in wage increase, and it gets eaten up by a 50% rent increase in 1 year, right? And the companies are responding. We're both seeing companies start to allow over 6,000 janitors, food service workers now have unions, where 4 years ago they didn't on campuses. And a shout out to Cisco and Facebook, two of the best on that issue. And you see companies starting to engage with folks like us on the housing crisis and their role as technology corporations, right? Which is something that just wouldn't have happened 15 years ago.
Yeah, and sort of thinking about a couple of the names you mentioned, and just this is sort of for both of you, and going back to sort of the founder level too, you know, the Valley has this sort of obsession with hypergrowth. There's that phrase, it's either everyone's favorite or least favorite phrase of move fast and break things. So is there sort of an inherent conflict when, you know, of thinking, using that sort of mentality of this idea of hypergrowth, moving fast and break things, where you're sort of inherently going to face these externalities? How can you, as a founder too, obviously you guys are growing incredibly quickly, think about, you know, managing and growing very quickly, while also being just hyper aware of
maintaining your ethics?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually had an amazing conversation with a female VC yesterday about this, about integrity and ethics, and we talked about this because Girl Gaze is a mission-based company, and what that means is we have a very specific focus and a lens, but we are a for-profit company. And so I think the VC community is still getting used to the idea that you can be a company that has a mission, but is also a for-profit and is not a non-profit. So there's an education piece, and there's a discomfort with that still, because everybody knows that if you have a mission, it means that, certainly in the case of Girl Gaze, there are brands who come to us who want to collaborate with us or hire our community, but it perhaps is a company that employs, works in sweatshops, or has had a CEO who's been accused of harassment, or whatever the issue is, and we as a company have to go, oof, don't know, are we okay with sweatshops? No, we're not. Are we okay with sexual harassment? No, we're not. And so that's a check that we will stay away from. And I have been very clear with all of our investors out the gate. It's the first thing, one of the first things I say, which is there is some business that we will not take. You have to be okay with that, because if we take that business, what it does is, first of all, I'm not going to be your CEO anymore. Second of all, my team will leave. And third of all, that's the end of our company, because the mission of closing the gender gap is what drives everything. And so it could be seen as a conflict, but ultimately what we know is that having more women in the workplace is good for ROI. So, okay, we leave some checks on the table, but we maintain the integrity and the health of the company, and long term, that is way healthier.
Yeah, that's definitely a topic I wanted to hit on too, is just the role of venture capital in not only gig economy, but social impact companies like yourselves. And I was sort of wondering, as you're having these conversations with VCs, is there sort of a change in sort of the thought process that they're having?
Is there a change in their facial expressions where they're like, what is she saying?
Yeah, I guess. Well, is there sort of a increased willingness to, maybe slow that timeline or be a bit, more, I guess, less hyper-growth focused and really pin
Yeah,
down
I mean,
that?
look, there are some institutional investors that would not be the right fit for us. They would not like us, we would not like them, it would not be a good match. What I will say is that more and more there are VCs who have their own lens, especially agenda lens, or in our case, what I have done is I've found people who believe in what we're building and who don't have a traditional growth timeline. And so, by the way, we're scaling insanely fast. We did 10x in revenue from one last year to this year. So it's not like we're not, but we are. We're just being mindful about who we engage to do that. And I think when you're honest about what your company is, the people who also align with that are the ones who are excited to put their money in and are excited to help you grow it, knowing that there are these issues that they will need to be addressed.
Yeah. And Derecka, since you've been sort of in the Valley for so long, I'd be curious on, how you've seen the venture community's role in sort of the evolution of the gig economy, where it is today. Is there a place for it in your view, et cetera?
A place for venture?
Yeah, venture capital. And
I mean, this is where I'm like, you're speaking a language that's very foreign to me, just to be clear. I mean, so venture capital is seeding these companies fast. Like, in my view, the primacy of corporate shareholder, the idea, one of the biggest threats to democracy in this moment, just to take it way out there, is the shareholder primacy. The idea that the economic model should exist purely for profit for shareholders. Because what that then leads to is a situation where profits are created up here, and it doesn't matter what the outcome is for folks on the ground. And so it would be great, I don't know a lot of VCs, if folks within capital itself, with tremendous power and resources, started to ask questions about what is happening on the ground and what role do we have to make sure that workers, but also the communities that we exist in, right, are thriving, and start to engage with folks on that outside of their bubble. You asked a question about breaking things and moving fast. I don't think it's bad to move fast. I feel like the world is burning around me, right? Like, our workers are scared of ICE, are scared of the president, are like freaked out that they can't make their rent. Like, the world's burning, right? So that's not a problem. But I do think when we break, that leads to breaking things without a full analysis of why was it built this way in the first place, who's protected by it, and what might happen. And how am I engaging folks not like me in in what's next or what's left is a problem. That's when you have all sorts of good ideas lead to really bad outcomes for people. Yeah,
and you mentioned the word, again, everyone's either favorite or least favorite, the word profit. And there was actually a question from the audience in here of, we've seen Uber we've seen after their IPO and look into their financials, et cetera. And even them who've gotten some heat for the economic model they have. Is there a way to both have positive economics for the workers, have prices that are attractive to the customers and the buyers, and still sort of have an economic model that makes sense for a business? Is that something that can be done? Is it sustainable?
I mean, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah,
I mean, that's exactly, like, we backed into this with, we completely backed into it by saying, what does our community need to get paid? What is this job? What is the payment for this job? What is the dollar amount? And then we basically did an analysis of what those fees were, what those costs were, and we backed into our business model. Okay, what do we need to charge the brand to earn X amount to make sure that our worker, our community, is getting paid this? Because nothing comes out of the community's paycheck, zero. We take nothing. If we tell them you're earning X amount of money, that all goes to them. They're not going to get 30% taken off or 40% taken off. Oh, that's our fees. No, there's none of that. when I tell you that's what you're getting paid, that's what you're getting paid. And so all of our revenue, our business model is the brands and the corporations that can well afford it are the ones who pay us. And our community are there for free just to get hired.
Yeah.
So that's our business model, and so far it's working really well for us and for them. They are so happy because they're actually getting paid what they deserve and what they should be getting paid to do X, Y, and Z job. So it's right now it's a win-win.
Yeah.
I'll let you know how it keeps going, but so far we're successful at doing that.
Yeah, and I actually definitely wanted to ask, I mean, when we think of gig economies, typically we think of the DoorDashes, the Ubers, not to keep throwing Uber out there, but you guys are involved in sort of the creative industry, so which isn't something that, is typically associated with the gig economy. So I'd be curious on, one, how you sort of saw that opportunity there, and sort of if there's any differences when you're working in the creative industries, both in terms of having sort of that marketplace model or just anything that's sort of specific to the creative industries here.
I mean, there's a big gap, right? No one's doing it. So certainly for me, I've been a creative my whole life, and I've been extremely aware of this very low glass ceiling that I couldn't get up off the ground. And so for me, I was like, why is no one addressing this? Why is no one addressing this? And so that's why I came up with the idea for Girl Gaze, because there is not another marketplace that has aggregated the hundreds of thousands of Gen Z, we're mostly Gen Z, the next generation of creatives into one place and helped get them into the workplace. No one was doing it. And so I'm also the mother of 2 Gen Z kids, and I was thinking about why has no one focused on this next generation? They are going to be the workforce, so let's get them into the workforce and let's aggregate people in one place to make it easy for companies to hire them. So yeah, when you're dealing with a creative community, I am a creative, so I understand the mentality, and it's definitely, it can be a tricky situation because creatives can be tricky. I would say that about myself. But I saw the opportunity because no one was doing it, and I wondered why, and so rather than wonder why, I just did something about it.
Yeah, and I mean, since you sort of talk so much about this, your workers in the creative community, sort of opening it up, I wanted to save room for some of the audience questions. Here's a question about, what are your thoughts on Uber's stance that their drivers are not integral to their business when they currently so clearly are?
I mean, they're lying, right? I mean, that's silly.
Is that even a question?
I mean, it's so silly. It's so silly. They have to. It's their lawyers talking, right? They're not employees, but. Hopefully we can change some of that. I mean, these drivers are amazing, by the way. Seriously, when you get into your Uber and Lyft next, and we don't boycott them. I take Uber and Lyft because the drivers are amazing and they need our support. They are aggregating online, finding each other, building community, organizing, doing actions like on the work site, going to the Capitol, talking to lobby. Like they are doing this stuff, and they need our support. It's just clearly silly.
Yeah, and actually, sort of something that is coming up recently, just recently, Uber announced that they're doing this Uber Works app, where, they're sort of expanding. Obviously, they talk about how they're going to be considering worker benefits and otherwise, but, they're expanding outside of just the ride-sharing area of the workforce. So I'd be curious in terms of your thoughts on them sort of getting into other areas of the labor force, and just generally what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I mean, clearly they're trying to figure out how to make some money. Not that somebody's not making money, but it's not a surprise. I mean, there are many states now that are, because drivers themselves are organizing and saying, hey, this is actually a really messed up situation. Folks are starting to think about how do we regulate this work, and what should be the rules for this kind of work, right? And so because of that, they're gonna not just do what they're currently doing, but they're gonna move into, Uber Works is gonna be a temp agency. And temping, one thing we know about that, it is another way to separate workers from where profit is centered and to isolate workers, right? Temp work is really, it's tough work. And so it's sort of like just another way for them to enter a creative relationship with its workforce. And they're going to continue to do that until we rewrite the rules of the economy, until we make sure, like California and this governor have started to do, that you can't. We're going to treat. California has now said we're going to treat these workers as employees. You got to figure out what that means for you, but we're going to treat them like employees, which means not that they can't have a flexible work schedule, which is a total lie. There are plenty of W-2 workers who get to set their own schedules. But it does mean they're going to have to pay into workers' comp and do UI and figure it out, right?
And I'll tell you, as a company that's based in Los Angeles, and for little startups, this is a substantial shift. And I have friends who are founders who are really baby startups.
Yeah.
And they're really torn because they want to provide everything they can.
Right.
But they also are like, I can't keep half my team on. Now I need to actually fire half my team because I need that overhead money to now go to the other stuff because of the laws that have changed. And so, now listen, this law went into effect 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago. So I'm curious what's going to happen over time, but that's the first sort of thing that I've seen that I was like, wow, now those people lost their jobs because that company doesn't have enough revenue now to keep everybody with those benefits. So I'm just curious whether it's gonna ultimately be in the best interest. I hope so, because it should be. But for little baby companies, there's multiple people I know who have let half their workforce go now.
And I am not saying it's not without its contradictions, and these new rules are insufficient, wholly insufficient to actually fix the sector. I mean, it does nothing, or it does not do enough, in my view, for example, to give the workers power and a voice on the job, for example. And I do think one thing to remember is that AB5, these rules came out of a Supreme Court case called Dynamics, that happened 13 or 14 years ago. Dynamics employees today are still independent contractors. The AB5 doesn't force anyone to reclassify their workers. All it says is if a case goes to the state, we're going to tell we're going to say that you have to have figured out how to give the workers health care, give the workers, right? But it doesn't actually, only the employer can decide whether to W-2 them or not.
Right, but if the law says
exactly
that those 3 questions you asked,
right.
and if you answer yes to them, then you are obligated to do so, or you are breaking
if somebody
the
sues
law.
you, yes. And so the question is, like, can we create a process through which workers themselves are at the table and can help solve this problem,
yes.
right?
That would be fantastic.
And I mean, you guys are hitting on right now sort of a very interesting topic in the gig economy broadly, I think, which is, obviously you had mentioned even the other case with the laws that were making it difficult at times for you as you were scaling. Just sort of what the role of government is, how startups can sort of navigate what is a very dynamic and sort of fast-moving regulatory environment, and also sort of how governments are working to sort of create a more startup-friendly environment where they can move fast and work with companies to avoid situations like.
Oh man, I mean that would be great. I think it depends what state you live in.
Well,
we were talking about this in California, that it is not startup-friendly, and there are I have friends who have moved their companies to other states just because of the tax benefits and because of the support that the government gives them from basing their business out of that state. So, I mean, that's legislation, and that's someone that cares about it enough, who's affected by it enough to bother to take those causes up. I'm just focused on the pay gap right now. When I'm done with the pay gap, then I will get to this other issue. But that's going to be when I'm like, I don't know, 80 or something. And even then, probably not.
Yeah, I actually wanted to definitely talk about, so another way your company's unique, I've said that probably however many times so far, but is, you guys aren't just focused on the issue of, economic inequality that's being created by the gig economy, but other, social inequalities that are being exacerbated by it. So I'd be curious in terms of how you get people to focus on that and then sort of have a keen eye on that, as opposed to just, the economic side of things.
I mean, I don't think that's hard for certainly for me and certainly for Girl Gaze. And fortunately for us, we're in a current time in the world where things like gender equality and the gender pay gap and the misuse of power and unsafe workplaces are getting more media coverage than ever before. And so people who didn't even know what the pay gap was are pretty fluent on it now. Most people kind of have some vague idea about what that is, all those things that I talked about. And so for us, we launched before this current government, but fortunately, there is a big push and a big awareness that most companies know that, oh, their executive leadership team is all men, or you've only got one white woman on there. Where are your women of color who are in leadership positions, and who's on your board? And, oh, you've got no gender diversity in there. Okay, so people are addressing these things. People know that it's an issue. People also don't know how to fix it necessarily. And so there are great organizations like the Board List, which is, founded by an awesome female CEO who basically has an entire database of women who can be on your board who are highly qualified. There's companies like Girl Gaze where you want to hire more diverse females within your company to create, content. You can come and subscribe to us and hire our community. There's plenty of places now who are serving this current awareness of people wanting to be more inclusive. And so I don't feel like I have to do a job on selling it because most people are really aware of it. And I know just from the incoming, I know that some of the biggest things we've done have been people just cold contacting us saying, we want to hire from your community, like, can you help us, kind of thing. We now go into companies, to Fortune 500 companies, and help them, where we'll say, bring us the problem and let us help you fix it, because we can do that, right? And it's not about shaming people and saying, wow, you've really screwed up, haven't you? And let us help you fix this. It's about how do we work together to shift the ratio, and that's what we've been doing, and it's been working well.
Yeah, and since you mentioned a couple, there's a question from the audience on just what are some of the startups or companies doing work in improving the state and sustainability of the gig economy that excites you both most, if there are any?
Man.
I don't know.
I don't either. I wish I could say that,
The good news is the gig economy, the app-based companies are actually very small. I do actually want to I feel like I have to always say this, but it is something like less than 1% of employment, app-based employment. Independent contracting is 6 to 7% of employment. So just to say, putting it in perspective, that's just important to remember.
I'm not saying, we all know the ones that we all know, you know what I mean? So
There's a new one every day.
I feel like what we've done with Girl Gaze is it's a creative marketplace. It's a marketplace where you can hire people to do creative work. That, the same way you would hire someone to put your pictures up on the wall from TaskRabbit or whatever. You know what I mean? It should be that easy because everybody needs content. The dry cleaner needs content. Everyone has to be on social media, otherwise you don't exist. You don't have to. That is all. That's another discussion. Yeah. But the point is that everybody needs to create content. And so we're making our community available per job to do that for you because it does not exist. Yeah.
And since we're sort of running up at the end of our time, I did want to just ask, sort of putting our fortune teller hats on a little bit, of looking forward, what does the future of the gig economy look like, both if we get this right and we are able to make positive change in the gig economy, and what does it look like if we don't? Is it something that's going to be around? What's the future of the gig economy look like to both of you?
I would say underserved communities and minorities and people who don't have a voice and who don't get a seat at the table and who aren't let in the room, those people will always be excited about any place that allows them those opportunities. So as long as we continue to marginalize and shut people out the room, there will be a market for something like Girl Gaze for sure. I hope one day maybe we don't need Girl Gaze, you know what I mean? Right. Maybe we won't need it in the same way, but I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Awesome. Derecka?
You said it very well. I'm in the social change movement. If I was organized out of a job, that would be wonderful. I think that we are in a period of experimentation, where we don't know what the new rules of the social contract should be. We don't know the ways, the current ways, especially to build unions in this country, are failing. And we have to figure out, what does the workers' movement of the future look like? And it will look different, and it will be ideally more inclusive. It will be led by women and people of color, and it will help us figure out. And trans women.
And non-binary.
Thank you. And but it will take us a couple decades to get it right.
Awesome, and I think, ending on an optimistic note is going to be good for everyone's mental health. So with that, Amanda, Derecka, thank you so much. This has been awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you
Really
so much.
appreciate it.